this was a pretty big story. In Canada, they have there has been these recent revelations in Canada about their. I mean, many people have known this. They've been talking about this for years and years. But the boarding schools, the historic boarding schools for Native Canadians, these are Native North Americans, but in Canada, who, generations ago and continuing up into the 90s, many Indigenous people were children were taken from parents and forced into boarding schools. Just recently, hundreds of unmarked graves were found at one boarding school, and now we've had another one, even more. Hundreds more unmarked graves found at former residential school in Canada. An Indigenous group said the remains of as many as 751 people, mainly children, had been found in unmarked graves on the site of a former boarding school in Saskatchewan. Let's see. For decades, the Indigenous children were taken from their families, sometimes by force, housed in crowded, church-run boarding schools where they were abused and prohibited from speaking their languages. Thousands vanished altogether. Now, a new discovery offers chilling evidence that many of the missing children may have died at these schools. The remains of as many as 751 people, mainly Indigenous children, were found at the site of a former school in the province of Saskatchewan, Indigenous group said on Thursday. The burial site, the largest one to date, was uncovered only weeks after the remains of 215 children were found in unmarked graves on the grounds of another former church-run school for Indigenous students in British Columbia. The discoveries have jolted a nation grappling with generations of widespread and systemic abuse of Indigenous people, many of whom are survivors of the boarding schools. For decades, they suggested through their oral histories that thousands of children disappeared from the schools, but they were often met with skepticism. Oh, that sounds so unlikely. The revelations of two unmarked grave sites are another searing reminder of this traumatic period in history. Now, keep in mind that these boarding schools were run by the Catholic Church. Think of how scandalous the treatment of children by the Catholic Church is in our modern times. Now think of that in the full age of settler colonialism in Canada. My wife and I were recently watching a show on Netflix, Anne of the Green Gables, that depicts some of this era in Canada. They do a lot of stuff that's very, it's a fictional telling. So there's all the good white people who like the Indigenous people. But it does show very clearly that they are just way too trusting of the government. What could be happening over there? Oh my goodness, we can't believe anything bad would happen. When there's just abuse. And here we're seeing mass graves, they're not mass graves, but they're mass burial sites of unmarked graves. So these are children who died at these schools, whether it's from disease or abuse. The Catholic Church is known for its penchant for corporal punishment, for beating children. Sun Green says the First Nations are groups of Canadian Indigenous peoples who are classified as distinct from the Inuit and Métis. Métis, I don't know how to pronounce that second one, but very interesting. But let's see here. So what this reminded me of, because I mean this has happened. They keep updating this story where there's more being found in Canada, and it's just the beginning of this kind of thing. But what this reminded me of was here on the Central Coast, we have the mission system. And this story came up in 2017. Continuing search for bodies reveals mass grave at Mission Santa Ynez. So Mission Santa Ynez is in Santa Ynez, California. And let's see, if I were just to, you can see this is the mission grounds. If I were to look it up so y'all can see what it looks like. It's one of our beautiful missions here in California, where little kids in fourth grade do projects and build little sugar cube versions of these buildings, right? But again, here in Santa Ynez, a mass grave was discovered. Scientific instruments discovered what appears to be a mass grave, jumbled bones and other items scattered throughout the cemetery on the north side of the church as the search for nearly 2,000 bodies buried at Old Mission Santa Ynez continued. The results are not unexpected for archaeologists familiar with burials at California missions. Ooh. In a lot of other situations, we see individual graves, said David Mackey, an archaeological geophysicist. Here, we're more seeing like a cloud of small objects, he said, as he slowly pulled the ground-penetrating radar. Blah, blah, blah. The burials are pretty shallow, said Mackey, noting the ground-penetrating radar was seeing as deep as 80 centimeters. We're getting a lot of reflections between 30 and 60 centimeters. This is sad. The rodents have been mixing stuff up, bringing things to the surface, he explained. We're seeing parts of burials and grave goods in the first 75 centimeters. So shallow graves, mass graves here in California, not within driving distance of where I live. We have 3 missions: Mission San Ynez, Mission La Purísima, and Lompoc, and Mission Santa Barbara and Santa Barbara. I did a big story years ago for the newspaper I worked at. These 3 missions were the site of one of the largest Native American rebellions against the mission system. There were many deaths. Dozens of people died in the course of it. They overthrew the 3 missions, but then they all marched to La Purísima, held it for more than a month before the Mexican military came. This was still Mexico at the time. And they stopped at Mission San Luis Obispo to the north, this whole regiment of military, and then made their way down to La Purísima, where Chumash had, the native Chumash had cut like gunner holes in the top of the mission building, like for, the muskets and cannons that they had procured during their rebellion. But so that's the kind of stuff that's going on all the time, and only now is it being acknowledged. This is what this whole critical race theory freak out is about. The Chumash here in my area, the San Ynez Valley Band of Chumash, they are like in 100% dedication right now to restoring their language, which has been a dead language. Like, people have not stopped speaking it. There's, I think, one woman alive right now who's the elder of maybe the Santa Barbara Barbareño band, who her mother was like the last, or maybe grandmother was the last living native speaker of Chumash. And the San Ynez Chumash, they're like literally writing children's songs in their schools. They're making up like songs in this language to just try to resurrect it, right? And this, a mass grave being uncovered is just the physical reminder of, the brutality and the death and what's been destroyed of their culture, and the people who spoke the language, who had all these customs, and that the mission system eradicated that out of their lives, and also at the same time buried them in shallow graves when disease or neglect or whatever. They were also worked very hard in agriculture. So all this stuff is a reminder of, this is why history isn't another thing in that critical race theory resolution they had at the school board was long in the past. These things are long in the past of American history. History is always right here with us. It's always, we are the bleeding edge of history, of time, right? And it's right here with us. It's influencing everything. And some people just want to ignore it, but we're not gonna.